So what if I told you that the way that your body responds to stress, carbs, even your fasting, is a lot more to do with your ancestry than it is to do with your willpower? Hey guys, welcome to today's video on how you need to look at more than BMI and your ancestry as to how to optimize your energy. So if you're new to my channel, I want to say hi, I'm Elika. I'm an energy optimization coach and a trusted advisor for purpose-driven leaders who want to have way more energy, because you know that's what you're going to need to create a big impact in this world. And this topic is one that I feel is not really covered in the depth that I want it to be covered and in the way that I feel it needs to be expressed to you when you're considering your energy. And that's because BMI for such a long time has been a topic of conversation for how many people assess their ability to be in great shape and to look at maintaining good health. And as the conversation starts to move towards metabolism and other ways like longevity and biohacking, we still really don't allow a lot of personalisation, which is so important for how we use our energy efficiently. And that's what I want to get to you today. So let's start with talking about BMI. So BMI is a measurement of height and weight, and therefore it's not a great measurement in metabolism. It's not a great measurement on, for example, muscle versus fat. It's not a great measurement of how your body energetically is responding to hormone fluctuations, right? And different ways that your body responds to food and its environment. So when we think about BMI, it's a kind of outdated method of looking at health that really means that you try to push yourself on willpower to meet some outdated metric that's not going to be realistic or even personalized. BMI was always used for huge population studies and not for personalization. And you wanting to be in the top 10% and being a high performer, you need to personalize so that you can have your own version of success in every area of your life. And BMI is just not going to cut that. So when we move from BMI, I want to think about exploring with you more of the different things that are going to affect the way that you personalize how to utilize your energy more efficiently. So when we move beyond BMI, we can start thinking about how does our individual ancestral background, what do I mean by ancestral? The lineage that created you, the lineage that came before you. It's something I love to speak about because there's a guy that I absolutely love that has been just a very amazing energy in my life called Michael Beckwith, for those of you that are familiar with him. And I just love him as a spiritual teacher. He says something very powerful, which is, if you don't do you, nobody else will. And I have a really big vision, which is to break the ancestral curses in my lineage. It's at the deep soul core of what I do. And it's because I understand that the studies of epigenetics, which has really allowed us to understand lifestyle changes that we can make, has allowed us to also break so much deep thinking and conditioning that things are always going to go a certain way for us. And so when it comes to how we create impact in the world, our health and our well-being, if we don't look at our ancestral patterns and if we don't monitor how that impacts us, then I feel that we're always limited to understanding of what's happening to the masses. And that's not going to give you the personalization that you need for your version of success. So what are some of the ancestral patterns that we can talk about? Let's talk about first environment. So when I think about the environment that my ancestors came from, so I'm Jamaican heritage. So that's a tropical climate, it's a humid environment, it's a waterlocked area. And I can think already about how easy it was for me to deal with the Singapore heat when I lived there for 14 years. Everybody was just really struggling with this, the heat and the sun and the humidity. And I just loved it. I absolutely loved it. To me, the feeling of the sun was just like, it was like eating your favorite meal. The energy that I could feel at a cellular level, my cells getting from the sun, was just so nourishing for my body. And having spent my whole life in England prior to that, I really could appreciate it. But equally, in Singapore, I was surrounded by a number of Chinese descendants that were literally crossing roads to avoid the sun, wearing sun or parasols, taking parasols, umbrellas, to shade themselves from the sun. and doing everything that they could to stay cool, even though they lived, and some of them were born on this tropical island. And so what does this mean? Well, our environment can really shape our body's ability to metabolize differently. So some people would need to be more fat adapted. Think about if your ancestry came from cooler climates. And think about your relationship with fat. You may have a higher fat tolerance. You may or be more susceptible to holding on to fat than somebody that, for example, was in a tropical climate that didn't need that extra layer of warmth around their organs. So environment can be really important from that perspective. Think about altitude, right? Now we can do a lot of tests to see how we absorb our oxygen. And I feel that, like, when I'm doing a lot of the tests on my VO2 max, my athletic ability is naturally very, very high. And I kind of sense that, looking at my ancestors, I know that they are very athletic. They used a lot of physical strength. They were raised in an environment where their physical prowess was something that kept them alive. You know, like Jamaicans were known as the rebel slaves, probably the rebel slaves from Africa. And even when I went to Costa Rica, where my great-grandparents were from, it was the Jamaicans that helped to build the railway because they weren't dying. And I look at this and I think about people like, you know, when I went to Peru and I think about Machu Picchu, and like, what sort of genetics do you have when you have to thrive in such high altitudes? And I think about what that does to your metabolism, your body's ability to use energy as fuel. So, of course, this is going to affect very differently my ability to convert fat into fuel, my ability to adapt to the environment and therefore protect myself to the sun. Like, look, let's be honest, just even my ability to do the sun, not just the heat, but my skin tone has been adapted to be able to absorb more sun. So the melanin in my skin, my pigmentation, allows me to have much more sun exposure, but it also means that my supplementation on vitamin D has to be good if I'm not getting the sun exposure that my body requires. So vitamin D, I see in my culture, is something that is something that we have to stay on top of much more than others. So we can see clearly how environment. Now, I wrote some other things that I really want to talk to you about around environment that could be really important. So when I move from country to country and I talk about doing things that human beings have done for thousands of years, and especially when I talk about nutrition, people always say to me, but there are really mixed cultures, mixed environments. When I say mixed cultures and mixed environments, I mean, they may be in a completely different environment to what their lineage came from. They may be in a household where, for example, their children have been brought up with, you know, two completely different races. But the truth is, we know when we study how genes are passed down, the mother lineage is much more stronger. So I always look at the lineage of the father, but I always follow the strongest lineage through the mother line. Now, genetically, we know through epigenetic studies, the study of how the gene expresses itself, the mother, the environment that the mother creates for the baby is also shaping how that baby now moves in the world. So we know that, you know, babies that can be sometimes a little bit anxious, when we look back how the mother was in pregnancy, we can mirror sometimes that issues and challenges and stresses that they went through were reflective on how the baby's personality was. So for me, to keep things simple, I do, when I get that and think about environment, I follow more the lineage of the mother. Okay, so we talked about environments. Let's talk about food. Food is really another one. Food is an important one because the food also is something that can allow you to adapt to the environment, but most importantly, to stress. So when I think about, I want to go beyond BMI because food grown in extreme conditions, like high altitudes, like harsh climates. Like think about some of the volcanic regions and the foods that we get from that. I take at the moment a lot of adaptogenic mushrooms, and I take things like chaga, and these are superfoods that are so nutrient dense, you know, and we, you know, a lot of us went through that kind of quinoa phrase where it was like, oh, quinoa is the new superfood. But again, we think about all the foods that came from Peru and that region, like maca, as well as quinoa and chia seeds. And these are foods that are going in extreme climates. Ashwagandha is something that I typically recommend for a lot of my clients who have high stressed environments. And again, these are foods that have allowed us to adapt to climates. But then there are foods that your DNA will respond well to. So in Asia, one of the common themes that would frustrate me was where the locals were told not to eat rice, and because of the diabetic issues that was happening in especially Singapore and Malaysia. And I would see that every Asian person that wasn't eating rice or moved to brown rice, they would eat bread instead as a replacement. And that wasn't part of their ancestral background. And it's funny because when I think about bread over rice, the grain that bread was made from is completely not from the ancestral lineage that they come from. So you think about the body interpreting that. Also brown rice. Asians were never really taught around why rice was polished. So I would be in Singapore, people would be trying to eat brown rice and then naturally not enjoy it as much. But I would share with them that, for example, brown rice would be polished. So their rice traditionally would have been polished to remove the outer husks that were more fibrous and harder to digest. And that would mean that if you were Asian, you wouldn't normally be used to those harder husks that maybe your Western counterparts would be from the harder grains that they had. And so even though you intuitively knew that you didn't enjoy brown rice as much as white rice, you weren't aware that your digestive system wasn't made up to remove those harder husks. Also, you know, let's say in Asia, if you then go and jump on the quinoa trend and you start eating all of these superfoods from different countries, yeah, you can enjoy it and eat it, but you might not know the preparation. You might not be familiar with the soaking time because, again, you didn't grow up with your grandparents preparing that, and so you didn't understand how those foods were prepared. And so then you might find that you know, these seeds and nuts can contain a lot of phytic acid, which can be very harmful to the intestinal lining. And so you're finding you're having all these digestive food issues eating superfoods. And so again, you know, should you be eating quinoa or should you be eating your ancestral foods? I know that when I have coconuts, oh my God, like literally when I have anything coconut cream, coconut milk, coconut yogurt, anything coconut, like literally my body sings. I feel how nourishing it is. And yet I have clients from all over the world, and I've noticed some of my European counterparts, like Italians, they just don't have that same thing for coconuts, right? Look at how our body adapts to things like sugar, right? Or salt, depending on what your body's like. I know in Asia, it was very frustrating for me seeing people that were skinny, even if they were skinny fat. So even if the fat was around their organs, visceral fat, which was a lot more harmful, you could see that they'd eat all these foods and they'd look fat. They'd look skinny. But your Western counterparts, they'd eat the same foods, they'd eat the same carbohydrates, and they were obviously more carb sensitive and they would blow up. And again, that is because, like in compared to Europe, let's say, or even America, Asians would not have as many fat molecules. So actually, if you think about it from an obesity point of view, it'd be better to be American than be Asian, because if you're American, then your body actually produces more fat cells. And if you produce more fat cells, it has more places to store that excess fat if you're eating the wrong foods. So you can see that even in our nutrition, we were designed to eat foods that were from an environment that our ancestors grew up with. And then our body's metabolism, our body's stress levels adapted to those foods. So if I no longer consider that actually for me to be metabolically fit, for my body to convert fuel efficiently, I might need to incorporate some of my ancestral foods. Then how can I compete, or how can I compare on a binary metrics like BMI when, you know, my muscles require a certain protein source that they're used to, or fat built up on my body a lot quicker because it was designed to stay warm. So these are the things that you can see immediately, even in just food. that are going to affect you ancestral wise. So what do I want you to look at? I want you to look at things more ancestrally, and then I want you to apply that to how do you create a lifestyle that incorporates the things that your ancestors would have done, so that you can be metabolically fit. So the first thing that I like to do is measure differently. You know, don't measure on calories and BMI and these basics. Measure things like what's your muscle mass compared to your fat. So when we look at weight, okay, I could weigh 60 kg, but what percentage of that is muscle versus fat, right? So I like to be below 25% fat and much closer to 20%. But again, if I was just measuring weight or BMI, that wouldn't matter to me. But if I have more muscle, I know that I can burn fat. Just sat down doing nothing, I'm burning more fat than the average person. So this becomes a much more important matrix. Metabolism, my body's ability to convert fat or my energy into fuel. So again, when I have more muscle mass, right, compared to just weight, then I'm going to have much more ease in doing that. And then I want to look at things like inflammation. If I can feel that I'm constantly inflamed, I'm blowing up, I'm feeling bloated, you know, I've really had to work on my digestive issues. My gut is my human design is my sacral. My gut is my first place where things fail for me. My gut has required a lot of work in my 30s and now my 40s. And so with that, when I feel inflammation in my gut, I know that that's going to affect anything that I eat that day. I know that I have to go periods of time to just kind of let that inflammation release before putting more food into my body. So inflammation is going to affect, for example, one person's response to peptides. A lot of my clients now are talking about peptides. But for peptides to be received, which is a signal, peptides are a signal in the body, to the signal to the cell. For peptides to be received, the energetics of the cell needs to be switched on. Which, if the cell is inflamed, how can it hear that signal? Peptides are very delicate, so how can it hear that signal? So inflammation could be something that's going to impact how your body absorbs one food, that even if it's the healthiest food, even if it's a green smoothie, even if it's a salad, even if it's a warm, nourishing bowl, if you've got inflammation, the body is not going to receive those nutrients because it's not going to be bioavailable for you. The absorption is going to be affected. So this can be one way that we can look at it. Another really important one is hormones. So hormones also being signals in the body. Think about the hormone, think about, the first peptide, cortisol. So think about the pancreas releasing insulin. I said cortisol, I meant insulin, sorry. When the pancreas is releasing insulin was one of the first peptides known. And that therefore is a response, it's a signal to say, hang on a minute, let's lower the blood sugar. Now, if you don't get that signal, if you're insulin resistant, as in your body no longer gets that signal that there's too much sugar in the blood to release insulin, and it releases insulin and your body doesn't respond to that, that's going to affect hormonally the way that your body metabolizes, the way that your body uses its weight. So hormones for women, we follow a lunar cycle. So if you're not monitoring how your hormones fluctuate through the month and adjusting your food, adjusting the way that you work, adjusting the way that you eat accordingly. So you'll see my video that I do on the infradian cycle. So please watch that if you haven't already. That's a fantastic video. But yeah, this is about the women, and I have a masterclass called The Feminine Flow where I teach women how to eat, work and move. So 28-day cycle. If you're not monitoring that and not eating, adjusting accordingly these things, then of course that's going to affect your body's ability. Like, how many women do I know that keep the exact same routine all the way through the month? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense if a woman is menstruating that she's exercising just as hard as when she does when her estrogen is really high or when she's ovulating. For men, it doesn't make sense that men, when their testosterone peaks in the morning and they've got all that drive, all that willpower, that they wait for that to crash and let's say at 5 o'clock then go into an intense workout. That doesn't make sense to me. So following your hormones can also allow you to think about your weight management much more effectively and your metabolism and your body's unique response. And so again, we know that when you can look at your hormonal pathways, I mean, I always say to women that are near a significant change in their life, for example, menopause, that if possible, look at what was the lineage before and how did they respond in that period of time, what was happening for them. If you can speak to them, if you can speak to your mother, if you can speak to your grandma, speak to them about what was going on in them in that period of time and how their body responded to it. Because that can allow you also to support in that way. Like for me, I know that in my lineage, that iron has been a real issue. And I think that's because in Black lineage, we have a lot of history of issues with the womb, whether that be endometriosis, fibroids. And so when you're losing a lot of blood or you have a lot of inflammation in the womb, then that's going to affect, for example, 1, carrying a lot of weight in the stomach area. 2, because that's inflammation, right, as well. 2, it's going to affect your iron levels. So I have to keep an eye on a level of iron. Also, which I don't think in my lineage they even considered, we had a lot of cases of dementia. The brain-gut connection, if there's a lot of inflammation in the gut, it makes sense to me why my grandma passed with dementia, why one of her children passed with dementia, these all make sense to me because there was inflammation constantly in the gut. Another thing that I have to monitor is my ability to detox. I have a genetic pathway that has a lower detox pathway. So I have to eat more cruciferous vegetables. And that makes sense because again, if I'm eating more cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, I can allow my body to detox estrogen a lot more. So these are things that I had to look at by looking at my genetic pathway and what was ancestrally passed down to me. Not just in the DNA, not just in the tests. And I always recommend that you do get tests, DNA tests. You just can get one done in your lifetime. But a gut test, a really strong gut test, I should definitely do a video around gut tests. But a good gut test, I do one from a company called Nordic Laboratories. I'm definitely going to be putting this on my website as one of my resources. But I love their GI test because it gives me a snapshot of exactly what's in my gut. It's clinical data that I can actually work with and work with my clients when I see it. I love seeing blood tests because I want to see what are the nutrients that you're deficient before you supplement, so that your supplements are not placebo. So these are things that you can do to get some raw data biology wise, but you also need to look at the energetics that have been passed through you. Yeah, the things that have been passed through your lineage that can really help you to determine your body's natural ability to metabolize better and your own personalization through ancestral pathways that might be pro in a particular area, like me, my athletic fitness, right? Or against. For example, for me, that's monitoring my iron levels. That's taking care of my gut health and my brain health. So these are things that you can really zone in on. So I'm going to give you some questions just to end all of this. Some questions that I really want you to explore are: when do I notice I feel absolutely amazing? Like for me, I feel amazing when I'm in the sunshine. Like I feel my body just feel so fueled. What foods do I eat that just in my body just leave me feeling so satiated, so nourished? Right? So I feel that way when I eat curries, when I eat warm meals generally, when I have coconuts. Yeah. What type of movement patterns make me feel calm, rested and relaxed in my nervous system? So for me, whenever I walk along the canal nearby me, I can feel at the end of that walk, I'm just feeling so at peace. I don't feel the same when I go in the gym, although I love pushing my weight and showing my body what it can do and thanking my body for the athletic nature that it has. But it doesn't feel the same as when I have my long walks in nature. So it's good to ask yourself these reflective questions so that you can start thinking about, how can I move away from binary metrics, even the metrics from the blood work that sometimes have reference ranges that don't represent your unique pathway. So how do I move away from these metrics, generic metrics like a BMI or calorie restriction, and how do I think about my ancestral pathway and how that shapes who I am? And I hope you've loved this video just as much as I've loved sharing with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts below. So leave the comments below. And if you feel that this could be really supportive of someone in your life, share this video. I always say that the best way to understand more about this type of lifestyle where you're optimizing your energy is to to subscribe to my newsletter. You'll find the details of my newsletter in the description box. You can sign up, and that's where I'm sharing the habits, the hacks of how you can optimize your energy in all the areas of your life, especially in my 4-pillar framework, the energy reset recipe. And I will see you on the next one. Take care.